Eric, and welcome to Tapped and Attacking. Today, I mentioned in the last episode that I wanted to go over some of my commander decks I owned, and today that's what we are doing with one of my commander decks being Emry Lurker of the Loch, which I also called Emry Solitaire because you can play this deck basically by yourself without having to worry about it. It's very much just interacting with your own board, not so much worrying about people's others. There's like a few cards here and there, but we'll start by going ahead and going over the commander. So the commander here is Emry Lurker of the Loch, as mentioned before. And what it does is it costs one less for each artifact you control. When you play her, you mill the top 4 cards of your library, and you can tap her to choose target artifact from your graveyard, and you can play it this turn. So, the goal with that is to get as many good sack artifacts as we can that we can continue to flicker back, as well as just very much value artifacts that we can use to combo off on our side. So, we'll start with the easy of it being the lands. The lands are pretty simple. We only have 3 non-basics, being Seed of the Synod because it's an artifact land, so that's a free one-off on Emry, of course. We have Reliquary Tower, having the no maximum hand size is always useful. And Ghostly Quarters, since we do have a way to bounce lands in our deck when it comes to the graveyard, because we have a Crucible World somewhere in here, it is very nice to be able to just sack people's lands, then they have to go search for another one and keep on doing it. And then the rest, we run 22 basic islands. So in other words, this is a commander deck that only runs 25 lands, so, which I'm kind of proud about, not going to lie. I find it kind of funny that it's able to run so little. With that being said, next we're going to go over the zero cost, the things that let us get Emry out on turn 1 if we're able to. So the first thing we have here is just Memnite. It's a 0/0. A lot of these are just zero cost for the sake of them being zero cost and having an early artifact on board. So we have that. We have Ornithopter, same deal. We have Welding Jar. This can both be artifact just to have on 0 so we can cast them turn 1, or it can regenerate target artifact that we're sacking or that's being destroyed that we need. Next we have Mishra's Bauble. That's always a good value artifact, making sure you're below the top card of your library or an opponent's library and then draw an extra card at the next upkeep. I need to actually center these a little better. There we go. Alright, so next we have Stonecoil Serpent. That is a very good card against any dual color decks or anything because that's protection from multicolor. It's just a great early on creature that you're able to pump up and you're able to bring them back for much bigger later on in the game. Mox Amber. Honestly, I think any commander deck should have this if possible, adding 1 mana of any color from a legendary you control, being of course blue. Phyrexian Walker, just a 0/3. That's pretty self-explanatory. Once again, it's just a 0-drop, try to get Emry out as fast as possible. Darksteel Relic, same deal, 0 cost, has indestructible, try to get him out as early as possible. And Lotus Petal, one of the most broken cards in this deck because of how much we're able to bounce it. We can get infinite mana with a card that we are going to come up once we get to the 3 cost range, which is probably one of my favorite cards in this deck because of how much it breaks this deck in general. But it's good for getting mana early on, and it can get Emry out basically turn 1 as long as you have it. So that's the 0 cost down. Let's go ahead and go over the 1 cost. So the 1 cost we have is Aether Spellbomb, which is very useful. You can either spam bounce creatures to opponent's hands every turn, or you can sacrifice it to draw a card. And card draw is always useful, and being able to get rid of huge threats is very nice. Next we have Pyramid of the Pantheon, which is basically just an offline guild load until you pump enough mana into it. Early on Mana Rock, that can turn into a big Mana Rock as you pump it up enough. Alter the Brood. There's a lot of bouncing that's going on in this deck, so whenever a permanent is buffed under your control, it makes all opponents mill the top card of their library. Being able to do that with every single permanent you own, that gets a lot of value out and mills a lot of people. Of course, it's unfortunate against, decks that want to do that, but it definitely hurts for the ones that don't. Next, we have Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle is just being able to name a card and then making it so all of its activated abilities and whatnot can't be activated. Very nice. Gets rid of Planeswalkers, deals with some commanders. It's just always a nice utility card to have. Witching Well. Going ahead and when it's battlefield, scry 2, and you can tap 4 to sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. Having that scry is nice, and paying a little extra to draw 2 cards ain't too bad. Gingerbrute, just there for an early drop. You can sack him to gain 3 life a bunch of times, which is mainly what I have him in here for, other than just being a early on artifact to try and cast Emry. Universal Solvent, one of the few cards that actually involve, board control. We just able to blow up a permanent for 7 mana. It's quite a bit of mana, but since you're able to juggle it repeatedly, as long as you have enough mana to do things, you can just always blow up permanents. Next we have Soul Ring. Soul Ring should be in any commander deck. I went over this in the last video. Just Soul Ring is so good. We have Conjurer's Bauble. You can go ahead and tap and sacrifice it to put 1 card from your graveyard to the bottom of your library. That's good for any of the cards that aren't artifacts that are going into my graveyard, where they get countered or just get destroyed. Being able to just bounce them back to the bottom of my library and not have to worry about them being in the graveyard is always nice. And then lastly, we have Traveler's Amulet, which you can tap 1 to sacrifice it, go look for a basic, and put it into your hand. That is very good for just thinning out the 23 basics you have, or 22 basics I have in the deck. Even though, that's already not that many basics as it is. But it's a way of just finding your lands, since, you know, sometimes you can get mana screwed in this deck. I wonder why. Maybe because 25 lands. But besides the point. Alright, next we're going over the 2 costs. Alrighty, let's see. There we go. So the first thing we have is Core Wellsprings, which is whenever it comes in or gets put into a graveyard, draw a card, which is very good with the amount of sack artifacts we have, which we'll be getting into the later mana costs. Being able to just draw 2 cards and then zap it back out with Emry again to draw another one and keep on doing that. It's a lot of very good card draw. We have Throne again to tap and sacrifice an artifact, so there's our artifact hacking to proliferate. We do have a few Planeswalkers in the deck and a few other things that might get counters, like, as mentioned before, Stonecall Serpent. So being able to proliferate is very useful, and it's also really good in a game like Two-Headed Giant or anything like that, where you can just proliferate your teammates' stuff. Dramatic Reversal. Of course, to go over Dramatic Reversal, we're going to go over the next card too, Isochron Scepter. And we'll be going over why, mainly when we get to the 4 mana costs, obviously, but just having enough mana rocks, if you do this, it's just infinite mana early on, is always very nice. So we can go ahead and go over both of those. Also just go over them. Isochron, you exile a card with convert mana cost 2 or less. That's an instant or sorcery. Actually, only instant. And then you can tap 2 and it to play it without paying its mana cost. Which then, if you just tap enough mana rocks and then play it, you untap your mana rocks. You still have floating mana. You can do it again and again because it untaps Isochron Scepter. That's how that combo works. You get infinite mana. So, next is Grinding Station, one of my favorite cards in the deck, to sacrifice an artifact and make a player put the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or graveyard. If someone's already close to dead by mill, you're able to just zap them with as many as you can, because you can untap it whenever an artifact comes in. Or you can just fill up your graveyard with more fuel, which is always very nice. Next, we have another one of the board control cards, Cyclonic Rift. Cyclonic Rift is just such an iconic card, just being able to bounce a permanent, or being able to tap a total of 9 mana, or sorry, 7 mana, because you have to pay the other cost, it's just the overload cost. 7 mana to bounce every other non-land permanent to their owner's hands except your own is always a nice thing. Microsynth Wellspring, very much like the Traveler's Amulet. We would just use it to go tutor for our basic lands and get them as much as we can, because we only have so many. Helm of Awakening, one of my tax reductions, making artifacts cost 1 less to cast. Actually, it makes all spells cost 1 less to cast for everybody, not just you. But that makes it very nice for getting just general things out. It makes most of my things cost, like, 2 to 3 mana kind of thing. It's very useful. Corridor Monitor, when it comes to the battlefield, untap target artifact or creature. We usually use that to untap Emry, so we can get another thing from the graveyard. And, of course, you can just stack it and then bring it back and then bounce Emry. If you have something that every time something bounces in, something happens, like, for instance, the Altar of the Brute we had earlier, that's a way to just mill somebody as long as they have enough mana. Lightning Greaves, being able to give your commander both haste and shroud. However, things like Corridor Monitor will no longer be able to untap her, so Lightning Greaves usually you have to switch it around a little bit, but it's not too bad. Ooh, almost fell. Next we have Folio Fancies. Players have no maximum hand size. I love this card from Zone of Eldraine. It's such a fun commander card. You can tap X twice to make each player draw X cards, or you can tap 3 to make each opponent put a number of cards in their library into their graveyard, equal to the amount of cards they have in hand. So depending on how many times you've been making people draw this game, or how many, say someone has a Con Sphinx out, they're probably milling a good portion of their deck. Riddlesmith, whenever you play an artifact, you may draw a card if you do discard a card. That both fuels your graveyard, which makes it so you can bounce things back to Emry, fills up your hand. So it's just one of the best, like, play an artifact, draw a card kind of cards. I do have another one in here, which we'll be getting into in the later costs. Next we have Mind Stone, which is one of our many mana rocks. You can tap it for a waste mana, or you can tap one it to sacrifice it and draw a card. So once again, good card draw that we can bounce with Emry, or it's just a mana rock in general. Ethereum Sculptor, yet again, one of our artifact tax reductions. We have Alchemist Vial. Whenever it comes in, draw a card, and then you can tap and sacrifice it, or tap 1 and it to sacrifice it, and make a creature unable to attack or block. If you're planning on swinging with a big creature, which most likely isn't going to happen in this deck, there's not that many, this is mainly just to save yourself if you need to. Like, say you're getting, there's like I don't know, some kind of big creature on board. You can just make it so it can't attack at least you this turn, which is nice. Mirror Retriever, one of the good combo cards, being able to make him die, return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand, and then being able to turn him to the board, and then just get your cards back in your hand if you need it. And then lastly, this one's somewhat for the meme. It's not really, like, fully useful in there. I just love Sundial the Infinite, being able to tap 1 in it to just end your turn immediately. If someone's like, you're getting your end stuff, they Cyclonic Rift, and you just tap 1 and say no. It's beautiful. I love it. It's so much fun. Even though it doesn't really have the best spot in this deck compared to some of the other cards. It's just a fun card to me. It always has been. It's like one of the 2 cards I'll almost have in, like, most of my decks. The other one we'll be getting into once we hit the 4 costs. So next we're going over the 3 costs, which is probably the biggest category we have here. So next is Blasting Station, which goes ahead and taps, sacrifice a creature, and ping something for 1, and whenever a creature comes into play, you may untap Blasting Station. This can go infinite with something that just infinitely untaps Emry, as long as we have enough tax reduction. Like, for example, if you were to make Quarter Mod, or technically costs 0, then you can, just keep on spam sacking the Quarter Mod or bring it back and ping people for 1 every time. Next, we have Darksteel Ingot, just one of our mana rocks. It's indestructible. That's one of my mana mana pool. Crucible Worlds, we brought up earlier, being able to bring lands back from graveyard. Since we're already able to bring back artifacts as it is, being able to bring back lands too. The only thing we're unable to bring back is any like blue spell, which even then we have ways of zapping back in. So it's just we're just basically able to grab as many things back from our graveyard as we want. Foundry Inspector yet again are one of our artifact tax reduction cards. Next we have Mirage Mirror. Mirage Mirror, I have so many fun stories with this card, mainly involving Con Sphinx on the enemy side and then turning my thing into a Con Sphinx and then each of us drawing our whole decks. I love it. Mirage Mirror just has so much utility, being able to turn into any artifact, creature, enchantment, or land on board. You can turn it into a copy of Dark Depths, and it doesn't come in with the counter, so it immediately sacks and you get a Merit Lodge. There's just so much value you can use with this. Scrap Trawler, one of the many broken cards in this deck as well, especially due to KCI, which is in the deck. We'll be getting to that in a minute because KCI is such a great card. So whenever an artifact creature, you control is put into a graveyard, return a artifact with lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to your hand. So being able to say your Sundial the Infinite goes, so you can re-grab your Traveler's Amulet, it's just another way to get more artifacts back in one turn rather than just tapping Emry once. Trophy Mage, you're able to look for a 3-cost artifact when it comes in, reveal it, and put it in your hand. Some of the 3-cost artifacts we've gotten through, we have the tax reduction, we have Scrap Trawler. I usually search for Mirage Mirror in this one just because of the utility of it. However, there are other options. Command Sphere. If we actually have enough tax reduction, this is one of the cards that go infinite in this deck because you can just keep on returning it, tap for mana, sacrifice it to draw a card, and then rinse and repeat. With the certain card out that we'll be getting into soon. War of Inventions. So usually this is technically casted as a 7-cost in this deck to go look for a 4-cost. However, you can cast it, go look for some of your 0-cost, 1-cost, 2-cost, whatever you need in the situation. But usually I cast it to search for a card known as, if I can find it again real quick, Mystic Forge, that's the one, which we'll get into in a minute as well. Jace Belleron, I just like Planeswalkers. He's alright in the deck. He draws cards, he makes other people draw cards, and you can also mill 20 cards of a player's library, which includes your own, in case you want to put that much fuel in your graveyard. Implementive Examination, being able to, it goes in, you can tap 1 to make it draw a card, tap 1 to sack it and draw a card, and whenever it dies, you draw a card. So basically, you tap 1 to draw 2. It's quite nice. Dark Side Part of the Veils, making it so players can only draw 1 card each turn, and also looking at the top 4 cards of your library to grab any non-creature, non-land. That is a very nice thing, since most of this deck is non-lands and very few creatures. It's mainly just all artifacts and spells. There's very few spells, actually. It's mainly just all artifacts. Archmage's Charm is the only counter spell I have in this deck. I was going to get a Pact of Negation, but unfortunately, I didn't end up making that trade in time and ended up going. So this is the counter spell I have for now. But it also has some other utility, like drawing 2 cards, or being able to gain control of permanent converted mana cost of 1 or less. So being able to just yoink someone's Soul Ring early on is quite nice. Serum Powder. So this card kind of combos with one that's in the 5-cost, which I don't actually see often in many decks at all, let alone an Emry deck. But it's another mana rock. However, if you can mulligan and you have Serum Powder in your hand, you can instead exile all the cards in your hand and draw that many cards. And the reason why that's important is the card we'll be getting into once we hit 5 costs. Alright, so next we have Sculpting Skill. We can go ahead and just make a comment as a copy of any artifact on board. Seeing how a majority of our deck is artifacts, being able to make like a second copy of Aetherflux Reservoir, or some of our mana rocks, stuff like that. It's very nice. We have Palladium Mirror, a creature mana rock, just a lot of mana rocks in the 3-cost range. Midnight Clock, once again a mana rock. However, it makes it so when it hits 12 counters, which is either on every upkeep or whenever you pay 3 mana, you put a counter on it. Once it hits 12, you get to go ahead and shuffle your hand and graveyard back into your library, and then draw 7 cards, and then exile Midnight Clock, which is very nice because you can just go ahead and reset your hand if you need to, if you're out of cards. Mirrored and Besieged, one of my favorite win cons in the deck. You can either choose Mirroring and just fill up the board with 1/1 tokens, but that's usually not the play. Usually we go Phyrexian, which makes it so at the end of your end step, you draw a card and discard a card, and if there are 15 or more artifacts in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. I love this card so much because of how fast this deck mills itself, especially with the grinding station we had mentioned earlier. It just, getting to 15 artifacts in this deck takes like nothing. Alright, so here's the card that breaks everything. Mirian Spy. A common of all things is what just breaks this deck into pieces. It's a 1/3 of flying that makes it so whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may untap target creature. You can probably guess where this is going. You play an artifact out of your graveyard, you untap Emry. You tap Emry to name an artifact in your graveyard. You play it, you untap Emry, rinse and repeat. If you have enough tax reduction on certain things, like for instance the command spheres mentioned earlier, say you have 3 tax reduction, you can play the command sphere for free, tap it for 1 blue mana, sack it to draw a card, bring it back, untap Emry, draw your whole deck, infinite mana, yada yada. You get the point. And there are many other cards that break in this deck with it, but that's the main thing, is just being able to make it go infinite with Emry. And lastly, we have Psymassive Thopters, which ironically also technically goes in that combo whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 Thopter to flying. You can just go ahead and spam cast artifacts like that to just fill your board with infinite tokens, and you can also tap 2 to sacrifice 2 artifacts and draw a card. Usually you'll have quite a few tokens in this deck that get made that you can sack, and worst comes to worst, you just sacrifice 2 of your artifacts and you bring them back with Emry anyway, so it's not too bad, and it's extra card draw. So next we're going to be going into the 4 cost, which is, in my opinion, some of like the best cards in the deck. The absolute like trucks, I'd say. The absolute like finishers. So of course we have Urza in the deck. Urza, Lord High Artificer, being able to tap any artifact for blue mana, tapping 5 to shuffle from your library, exiling the top card, being able to play without paying its mana cost is very nice. And it also makes a construct when it comes in, which is a 0/0 that has +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So this card goes infinite with Ice Conceptor very quickly, because you don't even need to worry about your certain artifacts being mana rocks, because every artifact is a mana rock. You just tap all your permanents for mana, and then tap 2 mana, tap the Ice Conceptor, untap all your permanents, and you're just sitting on infinite mana. That's how that goes. Joyous Familiar, another one of the tax reduction cards. However, it's historic as well, so being able to also get legendaries for cheaper is quite nice, being Urza, Sai, and a few others, a few of my planeswalkers. Vidalcan Archmage, whenever you play an artifact, draw a card. It's one of our very good draw card engines. Upbeam, Council of Innovation, making all your artifacts have hexproof is very convenient, especially when, 95% of your deck is artifacts. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you also own the most expensive artifact in terms of mana cost, you draw a card. So it's extra card draw as well, as long as you're playing high cost artifacts, which we do have some in the 7 cost as the highest, so you usually have that. So next is a card, good old Mystic Forge. Being able to look at the top of your library at any time and cast any non-land colorless permanent or artifact. That is very useful, and there are so many ways to break it, especially with a card will be getting into the 6 costs, which also just, in general, usually breaks this deck and combos with a different card, which we'll be getting into shortly. But being able to just, if you're out of fuel, you can just zap like half your library into the battlefield as long as you get, good enough luck. And you can also exile top card of your library by paying 1 life and tapping it. So in case you do run into a land or some kind of thing you can't play, you can still most likely continue playing stuff. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Here's one of the main win cons that usually happens to this deck. Usually what ends up happening is you mill yourself and you win the game with either Jace or, unfortunately, my lab man is in a different commander deck, which is my Taskar/Sidisi, which we'll be getting into in another video. But basically, once you just mill yourself, you just have him out, you draw an extra card, you win the game instead of losing the game. Quite nice. Being able to draw 7 cards out of his ult, or just make someone mill 2, most likely yourself, and then drawing a card. Very nice. So next we have Karn the Great Creator. Karn the Great Creator is so good, making it so other people's artifacts are for naught, and then being able to turn all of your non-artifact creatures into artifact creatures, or grabbing things from your sideboard. Unfortunately, there's technically no sideboard in Commander, so I don't really have one, but he's mainly up there for the top ability with comboing with the 6 cost artifact that we are going to be getting into shortly, because we're almost on the 6 cost. Next, Aetherflux Reservoir. Yet another card that can go infinite with this deck. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life, and then afterwards you gain 2 life, then 3 life, then 4 life for each spell you cast. And then you can pay 50 life to deal 50 damage to any target, or a target creature or player which has gotten errata to any target, I believe. So, with that, of course, if you're able to just instantly bounce something and replay it in your deck, you just gain infinite life. There are so many infinite combos in this deck. Leyline of Anticipation. I didn't have enough money at the time to get the Vidalcan Ori. I needed to get something that gave me flash, and Leyline of Anticipation just happens to fit the colors. Being able to play these things at flash speed is just disgusting. This is the other card I was talking about that I throw in every deck. Helm of the Host. I love this card way too much, and I'm doing a 32 commander deck challenge. I currently only have 4 of the 32. I am working on, continuing my collection, of course, and continuing building. But I can guarantee you, out of my 32 commander decks, all 32 are going to have this card, because I love this card so much. Being able to equip it to a legendary creature, and being able to make a non-legendary copy of it, and being able to keep that copy, doesn't get exiled or sacrificed at the end stuff, just being able to keep that copy, is such a good value. You have, like, it is so good. Next, we have KCI, also known as Clarkland Ironworks, or I guess the other way around. Being able to sacrifice an artifact to add 2 mana to your mana pool. Most of the time, that's able to just, you can sack an artifact, Emry can pay for it and bring it right back. Or you can sacrifice a majority of your board to just sink something into a ton of mana, whether it be a War of Inventions or having something important you need, or whether it be making a big Stonecoil Serpent, or whatever other X cost in the deck there is. The last one is Karn Scioniverse. He's just a good value card, being able to grab cards from top of your library. Opponents have to choose, but you take the 50-50, you get a card regardless, and you just get the other one next turn. And being able to make Karn Structs. And, having some big creatures, some extra blockers in case you need it. It's quite nice. And then lastly, we have the 5 cost, the 6 cost, and the 7 cost, which are just 2 cards per category. So, first one is just Gilded Lotus. Pretty basic card for for most commander decks, just a mana rock that has 3 mana of any one color. And then we have a card I was bringing up earlier that I don't see run in many decks in general, let alone an Emry deck, Mirror Fate. You tap it and you can sacrifice Mirror Fate, choose up to 7 cards in your exile, and then exile all the cards from your library and put the chosen cards to your library instead, making those exiled cards in your library. With this card, there are several different ways to break it. As mentioned, Serum Powder is able to just slam things into exile from the start of the game, so if you're able to Serum Powder a few things you need in your exile and then get a Mirror Fate out and just being able to link them back into your library is always nice. Another thing, actually, with Mirror Fate is with Emry, you can bring back Mirror Fate, tap it again, grab the 7 cards you want specifically out of exile, play them, replay Mirror Fate, grab another 7, grab however many you want, and lastly, for the last combo, what you could do is just have Jace Wheeler Misters out, tap it, choose nothing as target, every other card in your library goes into exile, draw a card, you win the game. Alright, so going on to the 6 costs, we have Ugin the Ineffable, being one of my best tax reduction cards in the deck. Of course, makes colorless spells cost 2 less to cast. We have 1 to exile top card of your library, making it into a 2/2 creature, so that makes it into an extra blocker, and if it dies, it goes into your hand, so you're not even losing value off of that. And then it also has a -3 of destroying target permanent, that's 1 or more colors. As long as you're not playing against a colorless deck or a huge artifact deck like this one, that can hit quite a few things. And then, of course, we have Mycos and Lattice, being able to make every permanent artifact, making all cards that aren't on the battlefield colorless, and making it so players can spend mana of any card to cast anything. Those 2 top ones are very important, because, of course, as mentioned before with the other Karn, being able to make it so all activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated, and then making every permanent artifact, your opponents can't tap lands for mana. Your opponents can't really do anything other than swing with the creatures they have, if they even have any. And also making all cards that aren't battlefield colorless, that combos with the Mystic Forge, being able to play every card that's not a land from the top of your library, just zapping it right out. It's so useful. It also combos with Padim, making it so everything on your board has hexproof. And then the last 2 cards in the deck we have is Nexus of Fate. Personally, I think any deck that runs blue should probably have like those 2 main cards. Cyclonic Rift and Nexus of Fate are just so good at this point in any blue deck, being able to take extra turns and being able to shuffle back into your library to stop yourself from absolutely milling yourself if you need to. Always a great option. And then we have Spine of Ishoth, which goes back into the Universal Solvent, being able to play a 7 cost, enter the battlefield, destroy target permanent. However, when it dies, instead of going to the graveyard, return to your hand instead, which wouldn't really matter regardless, because you can just juggle with Emry anyway, but it makes it quite convenient. So, with that being said, this is the Decktech, and to prove that this deck is basically just a Solitaire deck, I'm going to go ahead and do like a test hand for you guys and show you just how fast this deck can work. Let's go ahead and draw a hand. I'll shuffle this all up and see you in a minute. Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and give this a few more shuffles, and then we are going to go ahead and do a little bit of a test run of this deck just to show how it plays. Get like 2 more. Ooh, almost dropped it. Alright, so let's go ahead and give this a little bit of a test draw. I would say I'm going to keep this, even though it doesn't seem like that great of a hand. It can get online a lot quicker than you probably think. So the turn 1, we're going to summon on the draw, obviously. We're going to go with an island, and we're going to tap 1 to play the Conjurer's Bauble. And that would be it for a turn 1, just a casual being able to draw a card if I need to, and being able to have something back from my graveyard. So then we're going to go to our turn 2, play an island. Since Emry cost 1 cheaper, I'm going to go ahead and tap 2 and play the Emry, milling the top 4 cards from my library. Hitting Quarter Modder, Palladium Mirror, Joyous Familiar, and Mox Amber. That's 4 hits. That's always good. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and we don't really need the Quarter Modder in there, I don't think. So we're going to go ahead and tap the Conjurer's Bauble. Actually, it's put up to 1, so I'm going to choose nothing. Just put that in there, and then being able to draw a card afterwards. So, yoink. And then we will go into the next turn. We will untap, upkeep, and draw a card. We will then play an island. We will tap the Emry targeting Mox Amber. Be able to play the Mox Amber for free. Tap 4 mana. Play a Jace Wielder of Mysteries. We're going to +1 it, bringing it up to 5. Milling myself for 2, hitting a Megasmith Lattice and a Helm of the Host, and drawing a card. And then we will go ahead and pass the turn back to me again. Draw a card. We will then, let's see here. I will go ahead and tap Emry, targeting the Palladium Mirror. Tap 3 to play it. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana online in a only 25 land deck, because usually the usual is running like, a third of your deck being land. So running 25 is quite surprising. But we're going to go ahead and +1 again and just mill ourselves for 2. Hitting an island, and drawing a card, being another island. Wow. And then we're going to go ahead and go to the next turn. So this is currently turn roughly 4, I believe. It's like 4 or 5. Then we go ahead and draw a card per turn. We play an island. We will then go ahead and tap 5 mana. Play a Mirror of Fate. We will then tap it, slam our entire library into exile, and then plus the Jace, milling myself for 2, drawing a card, therefore winning the game. This deck can work very quickly like that. It becomes like not a threat to being a threat out of nowhere, especially with some of the cards being like, Megasmith Lattice is there, it's all fine and dandy, and then you slam the card down. Or, you just have a Mirror Fate down, then you just slam the Jason, exile everything. The deck usually just pops off out of nowhere, which is why it's quite good, because no one really sees it coming until like the last minute, and if they don't have a counterspell or some kind of way to control it, it's just gone. With that being said, that was the little test game. I will be posting the deck list online as well, which will be in the description, along with our Facebook page and our Twitter. With that being said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.